I just built the ultimate tool for Apple's WippGlass effects inside of DaVinci Resolve. If you want to learn how to build this effect for yourself, I did a full video last year walking you through the steps. This new tool builds and improves on that effect, giving you a much more realistic design, more flexibility, and a lot more customization. Inside of Fusion, here I have the old version of the effect, which looks good, but is very limited and it feels too rigid for a WippGlass effect. And the outline effect that we have here for like the shine is really cool, but again, it doesn't quite sell or fit into the WippGlass as much as I would like. So deleting this old version, what I'm going to do is after the media in, shift space, type in WippGlass, and we want to grab V2, press enter to add that in. And all we have to do to set this up is plug in some sort of masks. And you see here I have a rectangle and ellipse, and if I just plug this into the WippGlass node, now you can see we have a WippGlass effect, and it looks much more realistic than the last one, and a lot closer to what Apple does with their WippGlass effects. So this one has a lot of improvements under the hood, and one of the big ones is this new shine effect. And you see we have this nice reflection at the top left, a little bit down at the bottom, and you can see we also have that same shine reflection over here. So it's dynamically able to figure out where that needs to be based on what your mask input is. This one also has a new liquefy effect, and if I bring this up and then grab the S ellipse and drag this close to the rectangle, you can see it's going to merge these together even though that's not happening in our original mask. This allows you to get that really cool separation or joining effect that you see in the Apple animations without having to spend a ton of time setting that up. So let's walk through some of these settings and how to use it, and I'm also going to dive into the node and show you how to use it, because this is just saved as a group so you can open it up and you get full customization and you can learn exactly how I built this. And one thing I want to point out right away is you can use images as the mask. Now you want to make sure that it's just like a white and transparent background or black and white or something, because that's going to give the best effect. But if I take this logo and plug it into WippGlass, as you can see, it's going to apply that effect. When you do this, you want to make sure that the logo resolution matches the comp resolution, and the best way to do that is just to use a letterbox effect, and then make sure to set this to be pan and scan so that way it keeps the original size of the logo. And now we can add in a transform after that, we can scale this up, we can move it around, and you can see that the WippGlass effect is going to just dynamically update to make sure it fits inside of that logo. Now one thing to point out, using this liquefy slider is going to mess up the edges of a logo, so that works really good with like rounded shapes, but it's something you can definitely use and then even merge with different shapes to get those cool liquid effects. Okay, going back to just using our basic shapes, let's walk through some of these settings. So the first thing we have is the output. So the combined output is what you see right now, but we could also do just a foreground only, which only gives us the WippGlass effect. And then you can also do just a liquid preview, which is going to show us those masks with that liquefy thing already applied. Then we have the refraction amount as well as the spread. So the amount is going to be how far it's going to be distorting stuff, and you can go to either a positive value or a negative value. Now for the most realistic results, I recommend using a negative value, and then you can use the refraction spread to choose how far into this shape that it's actually going to be distorting. Again, the liquefy, we've already looked at that, but if you do bring this up too much, as you can see, it is going to shrink these shapes a little bit. And in that case, you can just take this correct slider, move this to the right or to the left to either expand or shrink that. Then the last slider we have on this page is the input blur, just so we can blur the background inside of the WippGlass. Pretty cool. Using the input blur is really good if you want to add some text or a logo on top of the WippGlass. And the way you would do that is just by grabbing some text and then merging this up after WippGlass. And then if I come in here and say WippGlass, we can position this on top of the glass. And if you want to make sure that this only shows up inside of the glass, you can just take the ellipse mask, plug that into the merge, and now you can see when I move this text around, is it's just going to be contained inside of that glass effect. All right, deleting that, we're going to go back into WippGlass and remove this input blur just a little bit so that way we can see what is happening inside. Because the first one is chromatic aberration. And when I enable this, what it's going to do is to do some chromatic aberration inside of this effect. And when I bring up the strength, you can really see what is happening. Let's maybe move over here. And then we also have the blend slider to just change the overall intensity of this. Now, I really like using chromatic aberration when there's an input blur and then just cranking this up a lot to give some cool effects inside of there. The next one we have is the shine effect, which is going to be those bright edges that we see over here. And just using the one slider, we can change which direction that light is actually coming from. And that's going to update for everything. It's going to update for the shape on the left as well as the shape on the right. And the cool thing about how this is set up is when I merge these together, you can see the shine at the top of this one is going to disappear as they turn into one shape. And this is just set up with some shadow nodes in the background, which you'll see. So you can change the shadow strength to change the intensity. You can change the blur to change how soft this is. the distance to change how intense it is, as well as the color and the distance. And speaking of shadows, we have the inner shadow, which is going to cast a shadow inside of this. And when I bring up the strength, you can see what that's doing. That's casting a shadow all around the edges, but inside of the liquid glass. And next up, we have the frosted color, which is just going to overlay a color inside of the WippGlass effect. And when I move this around, you can see it's just going to change the tint that it has. And this is actually a little bit of an error. There should be an overall opacity slider here. So by the time you download that, that'll have an opacity slider so you can change the intensity right there. And the final thing we have is a drop shadow, which is going to cast a drop shadow on the background to really give this some perspective and make it stand out from the background image. Okay, so those are most of the settings that you'll need to customize this to get it looking how you'd like, but you can also double click on this to open it up and you can access all of those settings. So for example, because I forgot to publish that frosted color opacity control, we can just find the frosted color right here, come into the merge, and then if I just click on this, we can use the blend to change that intensity. So you have full access to everything, even if I forget to publish it, and then you can go through and just customize everything. So let's take a look at how I actually set this up so you can learn from it and rebuild this for yourself if you don't want to pay for it. Right over here, we're starting with the background input, which is going to be our media in, this video of apples, and that's going into a chromatic aberration group, which is just going to create that chromatic aberration separation, which if I double click this to open it up, we just have two merge nodes that are offsetting just the red channel. If we go to the settings, just the red channel and just the blue channel. I talked more about how to create this in my previous WippGlass tutorial, so you can check that out. And then we go into a blur node just to blur all of the content before it goes into the WippGlass effect. Next up, we have the frosted merge, which is just going to take a background node, put this into a merge over the image, and then changing its opacity. I'm just going to come back to the WippGlass and disable this for right now because we don't need that. And the next thing that we do is create that cool shine effect. But before we do that, let's take a look at our mask input. So of course, if we come up here, we have the rectangle and the ellipse, and that goes into a bitmap node. And the bitmap node just allows us to use images and more stuff than just mask shapes coming into this node. After that, we have a blur node, which is going to create that liquefy effect. So the more blur we have, the more it's just going to mesh these together. And let's just move the ellipse over a little bit so that's happening so you can kind of tell what's going on. And what this does is when these overlap, it's going to be a brighter color in the middle. And after the liquefy blur node, we have another bitmap node that, if we just look at the settings, is compressing these color channels together. So what that means is that where it's overlapping, it's just going to turn to a solid white, which is going to create this liquefy effect. Now, after the liquefy effect, we send this off to a ton of different places that this needs to be used to create this effect. And the first one is over into this brightness and contrast invert node. I want to double click on this. The gain is set to be 0, the lift is set to be 1, and the alpha channel is on. And what that does is just flips the image around so we have an inverted version. And this inverted version is then going into some drop shadow nodes to create a shine effect. And so you see we just layer a bunch of those on top of each other to create all the different effects. That goes into a background node so we can set the shine color. And finally, that goes into our merge node, and we have just another version of our mask applied as a mask onto that, so that way it's only showing up inside of our WippGlass shape. Now, the nice thing about applying all of this before we actually do the WippGlass effect is that way the WippGlass also applies to that shine, which basically means we get that cool perspective of the shine being, a little bit in the middle of the glass rather than just on the edge. And speaking of the WippGlass effect, moving on, we have a create bump map node, which is going to give us this outline, and then that goes into a displace node to actually displace and deform the image behind it. And on this displace node, we also have the mask coming into that, so that way it isolates it and only shows us the image inside of our masks. Now, the next thing we have is that inner shadow, which is again just going to take in an inverted version. It's going to cast a shadow, and then that's going to be merged on top of our image. And the merge node is using in a top operator, so that way it only shows up inside, it doesn't show up on the transparent background. And finally, all of that's going into a soften node, which just helps to remove some of those aliased edges. So if I disable this, you can see, there's some rough edges. And just having a little bit of a blur really helps, smooth all of that out. And that right there is how you set up a WippGlass effect inside of DaVinci Resolve. Again, I have a tutorial on creating the old version, and then you can just take a few of the new things from this one and add it to that. But if you want a version that's already made for you and has a really nice inspector UI that's all organized and has everything that you need, check out WippGlass, link down below. When you buy it, you're going to get two versions. You'll have the original version as well as the version 2, so you can install both of them into DaVinci Resolve, but I just recommend using version 2 whenever possible. If you want to do WippGlass effects inside of DaVinci Resolve, WippGlass is going to save you so much time, and it's going to support me and all of the videos that I do here on YouTube. I've also got some other really awesome tools on my website with templates like editor collection and editor titles, which I use to edit this video. If you have any questions about this effect or any feedback, leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.